Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, welcome wherever you're joining us from. It's nice to be able to continue the conversation about the importance of responsibility in the jewelry supply chain. My name is Edward Johnson. I'm the Corporate Responsibility Director for Gemfields Group, a colored gemstone miner and marketer. But most importantly for today, my role is to moderate this panel with esteemed colleagues to my left. Words matter. If I can just start with that concept that words and communication are critical in society, words and communication are critical in marketing, and thus they're critical in the jewelry business. If I throw one word at you this morning, pedantic, English meaning being very precise about the use of words. Many people feel if I were to be labeled somebody as a pedant, it would be a negative thing. However, of course, without adherence to systems and standards and clear definition, society starts to crumble. So pedantic in some senses can be negative, as I just explained, but also it's critical to keep communication clear between all parties. So let me turn my rather obtuse beginning into the conversation that we want to have here, which is about harmonizing the language that we use in the jewelry business when we're talking about responsibility, responsible sourcing, supply chains from mine to market, and how do we have a common understanding about that? Why do we need a common understanding? From my perspective, sitting here with my role as a member and working within the CIBJO framework within the jewelry industry, consumer confidence is critical. If a retail customer walks into a store and hears one thing from the retailer, chooses to go to another store and hears something entirely different, a different meaning of the words, a different interpretation, they lose confidence in the sector. And we all know there are alternatives when purchasing things and items to jewelry. So it is critical for us to keep a clear understanding of the language we use, and many might argue it's critical to be pedantic about the words we use. However, as we see with social media, language changes. Methods of communication change. The amount of time needed to convey a concept changes. It's shortening. So what's the best way for the industry to go forward when we talk about responsible sourcing? Is it pedantism, sticking to definitions, or do we let language evolve? Welcome to the debate. Can I ask my learned colleagues here who are going to join me in this conversation today to briefly introduce themselves?
Hello, Ed. Hello, everyone. My name's Melanie Grant. I'm the Executive Director of the Responsible Jewellery Council, and I'm also a writer and a curator.
Buongiorno. First of all, I'd just like to thank Dr. Gaetano Cavalieri for bringing us here together. It's my first time in Vincenza Oro, and I'm really impressed by what I've seen so far. My name is Feriel Zerouki, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Corporate Affairs for De Beers Group. I also am the President of the World Diamond Council, and it's lovely to be here. Thank you.
Hello, it's great to be here. I echo my colleagues' sentiments about it's not any sort of a burden to come to Italy and be with our colleagues and friends, see beautiful things and have these great conversations. My name is Tiffany Stevens. I'm the CEO and General Counsel of the Jewelers Vigilance Committee, which is a US-based organization that attempts to protect the trade through putting ethics into action, and we do that via legal compliance and public policy efforts.
Great, thank you. As you can see, an esteemed panel of experts to have this discussion. And I think the starting point for this discussion is CIBJO's role within the industry. For those of you who are new to CIBJO, of course, the Blue Books are a framing area of work that CIBJO has been involved in for decades. The Blue Books essentially provide definitions to terms that are used within the industry. And with that bedrock of work, The president of CIBJO, Gaetano Cavalieri, before COVID, can you remember that time, requested that that CIBJO members set up a committee, the Jewellery Industry Supply Chain Nomenclature Committee, yet another acronym, but an important process, and asked Feriel Zerouki from De Beers to lead the committee and lead the process. So if I can first start with Feriel, what was the reason to start this committee? What was the problem it was trying to solve?
Thanks, Ed. So we started thinking about risk, as we always do, and the work that we were focused on is consumer confidence. What's the top risks in consumer confidence? And when you look at all the risks in the risk log, this was just before the pandemic. Pandemic was on the risk log, but it was really low in the risk register. Consumer confidence is always at the top, but what's next in consumer confidence? So we looked at the trends that we were seeing, and we realized that the jewelry industry was communicating with consumers in a very confusing way. We heard yesterday that consumers are left quite confused by the different nomenclature being used to describe jewelry. At the same time, we often in the industry get together to collaborate and discuss. And as I listen to people, I realize that actually language and words do matter. And we, within the industry, were using different nomenclature to describe different things. And so if we're confused, can you imagine how we're leaving consumers in this conversation? And so we looked at all of these words, and this was just before pandemic, when we used to think, 4 meetings a day was a busy day. Remember those days? But we noticed across the words that were being used that there were 11 key terms that we could actually categorize into 3 different areas. The first one, I would say, is marketing terms, the ones that we use with consumers, and that's your usual responsible sourcing. We heard a lot about that this morning and yesterday. Ethical sourcing, sustainable sourcing, responsible product, ethical product, sustainable product, and that list goes on. And so that's the marketing claims that we were seeing. And the second category was more trade words, so recovery terms, origin, source, provenance, being used interchangeably, meaning very different things. There was also traceability terms, as people started talking about traceability and ESG, etc. And people were saying chain of custody, chain of accountability, traceability, all being used interchangeably. And so we pulled these words together, categorized them, and of course our first point of call was Gaetano. And we said to him, Gaetano, under CIBJO, you have all of the jewelry materials. This is true collaboration. It's not a diamond thing or a gold thing or a lab-grown thing. We need to work together because we are speaking as the jewelry industry to consumers, and we need to be speaking with one voice, with one nomenclature. And Gaetano was great. He led the charge, and as you said, called on this committee to be pulled together. And that's the reason why it was pulled together, because we could see that there was a risk coming our way faster than ever, where we had to align, engage, and we knew that that was going to be the hardest part. I think Sakila said, when you try and align with everyone having different objectives, it's very troublesome and very hard. But once you align, it becomes super easy to implement moving forward.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think it's important to recognize that all of the sectoral commissions in CIBJO are involved and represented on the committee, including Tiffany and also Melanie. So it really is a cross-sector committee. And Mel, maybe I can turn to you to join the conversation about, Fez has talked a little bit about the background of the issues, but from your perspective, firstly as a communicator and a journalist, but also with your RJC hat on, what were the issues and what still are the issues that need to be addressed?
Thanks, Ed. I'd say first of all, we have to understand that every word has a consequence. Every phrase, every word, we can't let it slip into jargon. We have to be careful that people understand the basic meaning of the words. So, because everyone here has such wide technical knowledge, The words have to be usable by people who don't know really anything as a shorthand. So I was thinking about the word sustainability this morning and what it actually meant. So I went to the dictionary and I looked it up. And that word is widely used and abused, as we know. People apply it when they shouldn't. People don't use it when they should. In the dictionary, the word sustainability means balance, avoiding the depletion of natural resources to maintain ecological balance. That threw me off because I didn't really understand it as that. So then I go back to the definition of the word in Germany in 1713. It first appeared in a forestry handbook around harvesting trees. So that's quite interesting. So that's where it begins. In 1987, the UN Brundtland Commission defined sustainability as meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. That also feeds into it. Then in 2005, the World Summit on Social Development defined it as people, profits, planet, talking about fair business principles, social commitments, and environmental protection. So we have all of that housed in the vehicle that is the word sustainability. How do we make sure that word still meets our needs? How do we evolve it as a term? And how do we get it to a place where everyone kind of means the same thing? And so for me, the purpose of this committee and this conversation, if we were to take one word, it has a whole history and a context, which is always moving. And, you know, if we say talk to Tiffany, I'm sure there's a legal definition of sustainability. You know, that's the challenge. We kind of think we know, but do we?
That's a great framing, and thank you for your excellent research on that in advance. And I want to get to discussing the how the committee works, but you know, when we're looking at the issues and the risks, I have to turn to the lawyer on the panel. And you know, from your perspective, and especially in the US, with very clear definitions around the FTC guides and the green guides, where did you and do you still see the risk from a legal perspective around language used?
Oh, that's a great question. There's certainly a lot of risk that will never go away completely. I think there's a lot of opportunity that comes along with the current risk because we are in this time of regenerating and redeciding. We're making new meaning in our world, right? For better, for worse, with lots of difficulties and challenges as part of that. But in a collaboration in a place like CIBJO, where we can all come together from different parts of the industry, as well as different parts of the world, different cultural understandings of what these words mean and what the impacts are, is so important. But I mean, certainly, you know, while many of these words are being redefined, and in the United States, there is no definition, a legal definition of sustainability, which is a huge problem, and one that the FTC is trying to solve currently, and the Nomenclature Committee and JVC are a big part of that. Where there are defined terms, you know, as lawyers, we do want to make sure that people are coming together and following that and tapping into that clarity, not as a way to be punitive or controlling, but just to have a level playing field to make sure that ultimately the consumers of jewelry are getting easy, accessible information. I think being so entrenched in what we do, it might be easy to forget, you know, take a step back to the average consumer out there. Our products are intimidating, you know, aspirational, larger than life. I mean, that's why they want them, right? So they can be difficult to understand. The science behind it, how it all works, what some of the technical terms really mean, as well as extremely expensive to the average person. They might only buy a couple pieces of jewelry in their lifetime, if that. So that really enhances the importance of acknowledging the clarity and adherence needed to stick to the words that do have definitions and that we can agree on, while we stay committed to flowing and moving with new definitions and creating definitions for words like sustainability.
Great. So I think we've clearly set out the issues of why. We've got legal risks, we've got communication and marketing risks, and we've got clear business risks that are associated with both of those aspects. So I'd like to turn back to you, Fez, with how the committee has been implementing. You talked a little bit about, I think, 11 words, plus maybe a few others, so quite a defined scope. How has the committee been working so far? We understand there's been many challenges to people's time, obviously. But how has it been working so far, and what's been the progress that we're achieving?
Yes, I mean, it has been challenging. This was just before COVID, then COVID hit. No one had a playbook for how to manage the situation with COVID, so that took the priority. And work was a little bit delayed, but it's all been picked up again. So the way it works is the structure of the committee. We have all of the heads of commissions and we have the major trade organizations. We made sure that we would represent the global supply chain geographically and all of the materials that fall into what a jewellery piece would include. And that's how the conversation started. So option one was, what are the words? There were many, many words. How do we prioritize the words? And we picked these words, we proposed them, and everyone aligned and agreed, yep, these are the 11 priority words to address the burning platform that we felt was coming our way. We knew that the FTC was going to open up its green guides. And for once, I thought, oh, wouldn't it be just great if we were proactive? We would have done all the research, we would have engaged everyone in the industry, we would have aligned so there wouldn't be different positions confusing the FTC. We would have run consumer focus groups because every consumer has their own understanding of these words. And we would have provided the full pack done and ready to the FTC to say, here you go, an aligned industry position, united. That was the objective. So we agreed on the words and we agreed on the high-level definitions. And in these conversations that we've been having, we actually realized as we define these words, we need 2 more new words to add to the list. And what became quite difficult was staying disciplined and saying, you know, not a priority. I think that was very, very hard. And so agreeing with the definitions, I'll give you an example. You think, as a business, what am I supposed to be doing to be able to say this product is responsibly sourced, right? What are the baselines? Can we agree the baselines? And to Mel's point, she looked up definitions. Okay, so we did the same thing for each of these words and looked up the dictionary definition. And what we noticed is the dictionary often doesn't have definitions for these words that we're all using, speaking to the consumer. So then we looked at legal definitions. And again, to Tiffany's point, there was no legal definitions. There were many sort of iterations of what a word would mean in legal documents or references to the word, but no actual definition. And then we looked at existing standards in the industry first, and when we didn't find any, outside of the industry. And sometimes we found nothing. Right? So we engaged on what does it mean to you? And we took what we could to try and develop a definition that would make sense. So for example, the way I look at responsible sourcing, ethical sourcing, and sustainable sourcing is through a triangle, where the base is the majority, then as you walk up the triangle, the second layer is less people, and then the tip of the triangle is the few. And responsible sourcing is the base. And it's basically focused on meeting international standards. When you look at what responsible practice means, it means that, you know, you're not breaking the law, essentially. Not doing more and not doing less, right? Ethical, when you look at the definition in the dictionary, it brings in this question of morality. Morality is extremely hard to define, especially when you put the lens of cultures, the lens of religions, it's very difficult to define. But in business terms, or when we're talking about ethical sourcing, morality fell mainly in the social area. How do you treat your people? How do you as a business go above the minimum legal international requirements to do something for your people? So for example, when you're thinking about paternal leave, do you give what the country says as a law, or do you give more flexibility to your people? That type of thing. And then sustainability, you've heard all the research that Mel has spoken about. It was about longevity. How do you use the resources of today in a way that doesn't impact the generations of the future? You need to use resources. Doesn't matter where you are in the supply chain, upstream, midstream, downstream. We're all using and wasting resources. And how do you do that in a way where you minimize your impact, you set long-term goals, and you actually prove that you're doing the right thing? And so we realize the baseline in this triangle, most people can say responsible sourcing, because most people do that as businesses. Then you say ethical, for those that go over and above your baseline requirement on social issues, and sustainability are those that bring into their practices long-term environmental objectives to minimize impact.
Great, yeah. Mel, you wanted to come.
Yeah, it just occurred to me as you were explaining that, and I thought it was really useful. When you have a new definition, how do you inject it into culture? How do you get people to adopt it and to use it and to share it? Especially as we're seeing that there isn't a lot of places which are official places where it becomes the definition. So how are you going to go from the from this committee to actually getting it into the world?
Exactly. That's the biggest point, alignment. And so diversity in the committee is critically important. And we had geographical diversity. For example, we would do 2 meetings a day for all time zones to accommodate the different time zones. So we had geographical diversity, we had diversity in the materials, we had gender diversity, age, etc. in this committee to try as much as possible to represent the consumers that we engage with and the materials that we offer to them. But this is still a sample, right? The committee is a sample of what is out there. The stage after the committee is actually going and testing this with consumers through these focus groups across the different regions. And that information would have been brought back to the committee to say, hey, look at this lens. Do we need to rethink 1 or 2 points? And then post that, that would have been engagement with the wider industry for public consultation, more presentations to be able to engage, inform, educate in the most simplest terms, and then hand that over to the FTC. That is why we started so many years before the actual deadline.
And you've touched on 2 really important pieces there, which is what the consumer's thinking, which I want to come back to, but the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, when you pose that question, how? I mean, of course, the FTC has teeth to some extent in the US. I mean, it does, and it's much more effective as a regulatory mechanism than in many other countries. So what's been, we've talked already about the fact that we get ahead of the green guides that are being, I believe, redesigned or renewed. Perhaps you can talk a little bit, especially for those who are new to the FTC here in Europe, about what the FTC does and how this might feed into that to allow the how we make this operational.
Sure thing. And apologies in advance for being American-centric with talking about the FTC so much, but it is an important market, and this is a body that does have teeth and does take action, so it's worthwhile as a hopefully important case study, but acknowledging there are many other countries, many other important nomenclature discussions to have around the world. So the Federal Trade Commission is an agency, a federal agency of the US government that's tasked with protecting the American consumer. So that's their mission, and they do that in a variety of ways with lots of different industries and lots of different products. They promulgate different, they make meaning by promulgating definitions of things for the US consumer for marketing and advertising. And if companies violate those terms and those conditions and those standards of deception and non-deception that they've set, then you can face a variety of fines or even harsher commercial action against you, which they do take. Luckily, we haven't had too much enforcement in our industry as of late compared to technology and some other industries, but we're always working hard to make sure that we don't have that extra enforcement coming for us. And they take special note of industries which are, like I said before, complicated and or expensive, and we check both of those boxes. So there's a whole set of advertising guidelines just for jewelry that they look at every 10 years. And you might remember in 2018 was the last time they published their guidance. And this was, you know, the whole lab-grown natural nomenclature issue, which is actually much more nuanced than you will have probably heard about, came up. And so that's when they republished those jewelry guides. Every 10 years, they republish guides on the things that they really care about. And so right now, they're republishing, rewriting, redefining everything that applies to environmental marketing, and that's called the Green Guides. And that applies to the jewelry market as well as every other industry in the US or industries that touch, you know, that advertise in the US and touch the US consumer. So I think, you know, there's opportunity, like I said before, there's opportunity here, even though it's chaos, right? When everything's kind of being thrown up in the air and redefined. We have opportunity then to come together and to try to speak as one voice in jewelry. We are a small industry compared to many other industries out there, so it's hyper important that we try to consolidate our resources and voice as much as we possibly can in order to protect ourselves. But, you know, all industries are being affected, so there's lots of voices with lots of different motivations in this conversation. So that's happening right now. So I won't bore you with all the gory administrative law details, but it's a multi-year process, and we're about a year into it. So they've just asked their first round of questions, which JVC put together, talked to lots of people in industry, and put together an initial opening salvo that we submitted by their deadline in April of 2023, but we'll have more opportunity. So they're gonna respond to all these opening requests. They'll ask more questions, and those questions will give us an idea of what's really on their mind and what they're really about to do. And that'll be a nice time for the Nomenclature Committee to, you know, for us to kind of realize some of our pre-pandemic goals and act while it will still really, really count. So when we get those new definitions, they'll be really helpful to us and some things that we can live with and things that are meaningful to us. And ultimately, right, the goal here is to protect the American consumer. That's what the FTC is focused on.
Forgive me for this question that just came to me, because I could and I should have researched this in advance, but what does the FTC Green Guide say, if anything, about responsible sourcing, this term we've already used?
Right now, again, I mean, it doesn't really have a definition, right? So it's been a marketer's dream / nightmare to deal with how to, I don't know if you want to speak to how you've lived with it, but yeah, so we're awaiting a real definition. We might not even get one this time, we'll see, but.
And of course, that leads into what I think we all see now in the past 10 years. It's difficult to see any retailer talking about how they source unless it's responsibly sourced, or ethically or sustainably.
I will say, not to tack back into the conversation that we had yesterday, but the reality that we're seeing in the marketplace is we have these aspirations of wanting these definitions that we can all share and we can all make meaning together and go out and advertise and talk to consumers in a way that we're all harmonized on. In the meantime, in the US anyway, we're seeing a lot of lawsuits around people who feel they've been harmed by these loosey-goosey responsible sourcing and other claims that some companies have made. So there is a bit of a conflict and battle happening while we're all figuring out what our larger aspirations are.
Yeah, thank you. Again, the risk there that's sitting there. So.
Right, those are the teeth in action at the moment.
Let's bring it back to the consumer again. Critical for all of us to be able to speak to the consumer effectively. And Mel, I know that this is, you know, something at the heart of what you think about personally, but also, of course, for RJC as the leading standards body that sort of defines best practice. So where do you think the consumer is being led by the industry at the moment? What are they hearing from us?
I mean, the clearest message I've had from the consumer, both as a journalist and also at the RJC, is they don't want to hear claims which are unfounded. They're very, very upset by that, and it turns them off jewellery as a whole. So we have to tackle the claims, which is why we have to apply some kind of standard to the companies making those claims. I think that's key, just for credibility for our industry. I think they want clear, concise messaging overall that's hopeful, but realistic. I'd rather them want us to be better than for us to over-egg the pudding and then them find out it's not quite what we hope it is. So I think it's about awareness, really. The consumer wants us to let them know what the issues are, and then they want to choose what to buy. But we have to give them real honesty of what the issues actually are. You know, we still have people talking about blood diamonds. Like, you know, I think that film came out in 2006. You know, you can do one thing badly and it resonates for 20, 30 years. Or you can have a film which talks about one issue and it resonates. So we just have to be really careful. This is why words are so important. Just that phrase, blood diamond, just, you know, it's still there. So I think it's claims, and I think it's honesty, and I think it's then just clarity, as much clarity as we can give them without overwhelming them with technical information.
And I guess that's where we're going with the committee, you know, those clear definitions. You know, I want to leave time for questions, so please, everybody, do think about questions. We discussed at the beginning, and I wanted it to be a debate. So if we're saying anything you don't agree with, please, think of a question, think of a challenge. We welcome it, don't we? Fez, you know, you've probably got something to say specifically, but I wanted to bring it around to where are we going with this? How are we going to get to what we want to achieve? Maybe if you have something else to say, you can bring that in after or before that question as well.
Okay, I just wanted to add to what Melanie was saying, and I think it's critically important that these claims that are being made aren't, the intention for most retailers isn't disingenuous. It is genuinely because they don't know what these terms mean, okay? And they feel that those terms represent their values. And so over the years, I've been sat watching independent designers and jewellery brands talk about responsible sourcing or ethics and talk about why they are ethical and the decisions that they have made in order to make that claim without fully intending to, or knowing that actually that's not what the word means. And me, myself, I have often been in panels where the question is thrown at me, you know, about natural diamonds, because obviously I work for De Beers, I'm in the diamond industry, and people will say to me, what's more ethical, natural or lab-grown? What's your view? Go. And my point here is anyone that claims to use product as a shortcut to sustainability is someone that is bypassing, intentionally or unintentionally, actually doing the right thing. So you can be in natural diamonds and be good. You can be in natural diamonds and be bad. You can be in lab-grown and be good. And you can be in lab-grown and be bad as an actor. So it's not about the product. It is about the actor and the standards that they apply. So when I hear, and you'll often see me stand up from the audience and go, I want to ask a question. When I hear things like, you know, I am ethical because I only use lab-grown and recycled gold. I often ask, well, what is it that you do exactly with lab-grown and recycled gold to make sure that you are ethical, or you are sustainable, or you are sourcing responsibly? Because the product itself is a product, right? So what do you do? And that's what I'm interested in. And so again, I talk about intentions. What does the business do? And here, providing super simple, clear definitions enables small businesses, medium businesses, and large businesses to understand, actually, here's what I need to do. Because the world out there is pretty scary when there's no definitions, you know? So if we can align on that and start with responsible sourcing, work our way up to ethical, and work our way up to sustainable, that's a great thing. That's a real great thing for our industry. And we will be far more advanced than many other industries out there that have not yet started the journey. What I worry about is legislation. If we don't do it, guess what? It will get legislated. And at that point, it's a little bit too late. We all suffer. We wouldn't have had the right input, and we don't know which way is up. Right? And so this is the time to be proactive. When we talk about being proactive and less reactive, this is where we need to unite. There is no competition on this front, right? Competition is making your product, design, your brand sellable, more sellable than others. But in terms of competition on sustainability issues, that's a bit odd to me. We need to act as one because it's an industry issue.
Thought-provoking, I hope. I'd like to turn it over to you. We've got some questions, so, or we'd like some questions from you. We've given opinions here. We've used words to express our thoughts. Are there any words that you disagreed with, anything you agreed with? Is there any retailers out there that use the word responsibly sourced? What does it mean to you? How do you define it? Please, any questions from you? I see a hand here from Raluca. And please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Ooh, this is a little bit too loud. I was getting ready like Feriel. If I don't get the mic, I'll speak up enough. My name is Raluca Angel. I'm the head of external affairs for the Natural Diamond Council. And I actually wanted to pick up on the last point that Feriel made on legislation. The Nomenclature Committee within CIBJO is, of course, looking at these definitions in parallel with legislation being developed, whether it's in the United States, in the EU, or across any other markets. How do you make sure, Feriel, that there is, let's say, a parallel process, but that these definitions are integrated so that we don't end up having legislation that says something and the industry being self-regulated in another perspective? I guess you're looking at the two, so how is that being done for everyone out there?
Great question. And yes, you're absolutely right. Legislation is being developed in parallel. And the way that we are trying to influence that process is by bringing people along the journey. So, for example, Raluca is a great member of the committee and she has her finger on the pulse in all of these legislations. So she brings into the committee the information, the upcoming headwinds, and everyone is well informed so that we can then engage different members in the committee with the latest information to say, okay, please can you let X, Y, and Z government know that this work is happening and we're ready to engage. That's how we try and tackle it. Now, of course, as I mentioned, influence can go just as far as, and words also matter. So saying, hey, this is a united position of the industry isn't factually correct. We've united within the committee, right? There's still much more work to do. But what we can engage on is to say, this is the work that's happening at the committee and it's quite advanced and this is the plan. Would you like to be part of it as government so that you're aware of what's going on? So that's how we try and tackle that. Thanks, Raluca.
I'm very pedantic about time, as well as words, and I was asked to finish at 12 o'clock. We're coming up to that, but I'm very keen if there's anybody else in the audience that does have any questions, we'll make time. Iris. Maybe Iris first, and if we could go to Gaetano afterwards. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Iris van der Viken, Executive Director of the Watch and Jewel Initiative 2030. I first of all wanted to say, thank you for doing this work because it will really help protect the integrity of how we communicate about the industry. And I also wanted to ask, and I don't know if it's a question for Tiff or Feriel, is about while you're defining these definitions, how far will you go also in giving guidance on companies, how they can communicate then to their external stakeholders? And I'm thinking about marketeers, because we know with the Green Deal and then everything on claims in Europe, that marketeers are very nervous now to make any claim. And at the same time, they have to stay competitive, communicate about the mystery. So I was just thinking, will there be some kind of framework or just overview for some of these experts, because I think it might be helpful. So I just wanted to understand next steps in your long-term thinking. But again, I congratulate you on your work.
Thanks, Iris. And that's a... Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Please go ahead. It's a great question. We aren't here to regulate as a committee, so we will provide the definitions, the guidance, the information on how consumers engage with these definitions, and the final sort of guidelines for industry. It is then a great free toolkit for industry to be able to use when communicating, and people can point to it to say, hey, do you think you're doing the right thing here because of these guidelines? So that's the objective. Who will regulate? Legislators, governments, right? And so the most important thing is to influence that, because the worst thing that can happen to us as an industry is for regulators to put the wrong type of legislation.
Likewise, we really focus on creating educational tools once we have definitions of things, and then we help people in real time for the things that are a little bit more confusing by providing sort of case studies and anecdotal evidence from other players who have navigated the uncertainties, but certainly looking forward to having some more clarity and things to build some educational tools around.
Gaetano.
Mine is not a question, but is just a little comment. Let me first thank this esteemed lady, and I like very much to see so many ladies with us, even yesterday and the panel before. I think that in this industry, more than ever, when Feriel was talking about how this committee start, we have to speak one language, and we have to use a terminology that we all understand exactly what does it mean. Apparently looks something very simple, but is not. So she chairing this committee, as well she chaired the World Diamond Council, as well all the other organizations where she is deeply involved, and I am one of those probably few people that I have a real privilege to be seated in several board or committees with Feriel. It is important to give to the consumers through the entire supply chain, individuals, businessmen, companies, managing directors, CEOs, president, and so on, the possibility to talk each other in order to produce in the entire supply chain jewelry products, despite are with diamonds or color stones or gold or silver or platinum, that has to be addressed in the right way, because this industry, as ever and much than ever today, is producing emotions, and the people want to be happy. If you look around us and you look at the newspaper, disaster all around the world. But what we do in this industry collectively, not individually, what we do, we try to supply something good. So I want personally now express my deep appreciation and thank to you, Feriel, in chairing this organization and this committee, as well all the others that you chair, but the contribution that, thanks to your effort, all of us are privileged to give to our consumers is truly immense. And on behalf of the organization that I myself chair, of which you are a very important part as well, others, but you in particularly, I am very proud of what we are doing, and thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you. I see two more hands, and I think we are okay to carry on, and please, we would welcome them. Two more hands over here. Yes, please. Who's got the microphone? Does somebody have the microphone? Thank you very much, sir. Please, welcome.
Hello, I'm Jignesh Hemani from Fine Jewelry Manufacturing, a jewelry manufacturer and exporter from India. My question is that on some of the terms, there are different definitions from the regulators. In some of the regulators, there's no definition. And there are some different definitions from the standard setting bodies, you know. So in such a situation, how does a jewelry manufacturer or a retailer convey the right meaning to the end consumer? Because they are totally confused in terms of what, so just as an example, recycle gold, you know, or recycle metals, what it would mean in a FTC guideline to what it would be in a RJC standard to what it would be in India, you know.
Great question, thank you. I mean, we mentioned standards, so I'd like to come for you for that, if that's okay, but we also mentioned FTC, so maybe, Tiff, you could address that.
I think from our perspective, we are, reviewing our definition of recycled gold at the moment. We'd welcome, we're in a public consultation, we welcome everyone's feedback. We often have these questions, and then we get very few people consulting with us in the public consultations. So I think most bodies like ours consult publicly for quite a long period of time. We want everyone's feedback, and obviously we do then align with lots of industry bodies. So we try and find alignment across the industry as much as we can. The downside, I suppose, is, if we're aligning with, say, a body who represents a slightly different demographic, they have slightly different needs, but we absolutely try our hardest. And CIBJO and other organizations like that work with us. So we try and get as close as possible to one streamlined definition. It's not always possible, but we do try very hard, and it takes us quite a long time. So yeah, I would just say talk to your, if you're a member of an organization, tell them what you want. Often that doesn't happen, and then afterwards people say it should have been this. So really talk to, the companies that you feed into, and then we will talk to each other.
Exactly. But you really hit the nail on the head, right? Because this is alive, this conversation, particularly the one that you mentioned, this is alive. That's why it feels confusing, because it is changing and it is up for debate and it is different in different countries. And so I think your advice is great. If you pinpoint your major markets and make sure that you're engaging with an RJC or a JVC or whoever can give you the most up-to-date advice on those markets that you're dealing with. And then unfortunately, just stay engaged, because it will continue to change. And then give your feedback as well, because these conversations are being shaped. So use your voice to say what you think it should mean, given your experience on the ground and your experience with your own customers.
I'll just add to that. So the thing that you raised is critically important. We have trade associations. I'm a member of JVC, I'm a member of RJC, I'm a member of CIBJO. CIBJO is doing this important work under the ISO to bring this together. And I don't know anything about gold. I know that the definition of recycled gold is being reviewed, but from a jewelry perspective, we need one definition. What we don't want is a different legislation in the US to a different legislation in Europe, and then we are a globally connected supply chain. How do we comply with two types of definitions? And for me, that is what the role of RJC, JVC, CIBJO is, to explain this to the regulators. We are one industry. It doesn't matter where you are, regionally. We can't have different definitions for one product that moves around the world so much. We need one definition, and that's the critical importance for the issue of recycled. I'll give you another example. In stones, diamonds, colored stones, there is no definition for recycled, right? But it's very important that we start thinking about this. Why? Because the G7, as you probably all know, is setting upcoming import restrictions. Now, from the engagement that we've had, we sort of understand, we don't have that much detail, but we sort of understand what it may be coming our way. But what may be coming our way focuses only on new production. We know in the diamond industry, B2B, there's $9 billion worth of stock, at least on RapNet. What happens to that, right? And we know, at least I know as a miner, our mines are finite. Natural diamonds are finite. They're not, you know, manufactured and forever growing. So the largest inventory out there is recycled. So what does recycled mean in natural diamonds? What does recycled mean in colored stones? Should it be somehow linked to the definition of recycled in gold? Should we wait for that to be aligned on, or should we just start our own thing? At this stage, I feel like we need to start the definition of recycled for stones ASAP, like yesterday, because we have two things to address in this upcoming regulation. Old stock, which is essentially legacy, which technically means hasn't been sold to a consumer and came back yet. It's just stock that the industry is sitting on, right? And then you have recycled, which has come back somehow from a consumer. It could be repurposed, could be recut, whatever it could be. But we need to align on that. Why? Because legislation is coming our way, and we need to give the words to the legislators so that they can set rules for new production, old stock or legacy diamonds, and recycled. And we can't wait. Otherwise, a decision will be made for us.
Lots to consider. One more question to consider. Thank you very much.
My name's Leanne Kemp. I'm the CEO of Everledger, a technology company focused on traceability and sustainability. I liked your opening words. I'm interested in the alphabet. When, if ever, will the industry enable the digital or data language of the responsible supply chains? As a technologist, it's incredibly difficult when there is no effective rules of the road when it comes to building systems, connecting systems, and then ultimately every person on the planet is connected in some digital way and the message is delivered via data. So when you promoted the diversity in the committee, where are the nerds?
Great to have you back with us, Leanne. Thank you.
I never went away.
Yeah, words matter, Leanne, and yeah, there's lots of nerds on the committee. So on a data perspective or on a traceability perspective, we identified, as I mentioned, recovery terms are critically important. So, and traceability terms. So chain of custody is usually the words that, you know, standards use. Chain of accountability and traceability. Chain of accountability is not often used, but traceability is used a lot in the downstream and also with tech companies. But what does it mean? So chain of custody is the documented movement of product. Chain of accountability is the people and actors across the supply chain that handle that product and take ownership of that data and the product. And you can only claim traceability if you do both. You follow the movement of the product and you know those that take ownership of the product. And so that's where we're at now with the technical committee. As I mentioned, we're not there yet. We haven't taken that external. And then we will be engaging on a much wider audience as soon as we've aligned on these issues. But these two things are critically important because you can't claim traceability without the two.
I made a mistake earlier. We weren't finishing at 12 o'clock. We're finishing at 12:15. Which is now. So we had time for that extra 15 minutes. Thank you very much to all of you. Please, if you have further questions about the committee and the work that it's doing, there are 3 members here who'd be happy to talk to you. Get engaged. This is not a situation where too many cooks will spoil the broth. We need a full, diverse voice into this work. Thank you very much, everybody. Next up, big data. Please stay.